girlfriend company members.
Thanks.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Are you going to stand up the whole time to do the camera?
No,
thing?
I'm just making sure. Like, I don't know.
I'm wondering if
David was going to come too, right?
today's reservation is actually under his name.
Oh,
This first part.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but I kept my later reservation under my name. So this first part, is the presentation. And the second part, he and I, or maybe his girlfriend, are going to work on other stuff that we haven't got to yet.
Okay.
We've been meeting every day,
Nice.
anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, something like that.
Yeah.
That order. At least one more chair.
oh, we have quite a lot of chairs. So
Uh-huh.
I didn't use that yet.
And there seems to be coffee.
So we would have to make it, I think.
Oh, yeah, you have to bring it. Or maybe that's for staff, I don't know. Hand sanitation station. Okay.
Nice guy.
Thanks.
Do you want to go out for a minute?
No, just when I think it's fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you get a reservation for a drive up to Pikes Peak?
Do you need a reservation?
You should.
Okay, so that's the one thing I forgot about the two.
Right.
Is that how this goes?
Yeah, that's my phone.
Yes, this is a very big holiday weekend coming up.
I have a pink here.
And so,
We
You'll
should
get the
probably do it this afternoon.
Why the
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the cutest one.
I don't remember the website, I'll see if I.
But when would that take place?
Can you go out in public looking like this to get in on my getting out?
Maybe not. Would that fit you?
Sometimes. Sometimes.
Possibly if it's not available Thursday afternoon is available, we can maybe do it Thursday afternoon. But was there something else?
Yes, I was going to say that maybe, as far as our work is concerned, maybe we do not even need the reservation on Friday for the library.
Okay, yeah, so if Friday morning is available, that's another option.
Yeah.
I was gonna mention,
Okay.
we're just,
Well, I'm David.
Your money. I'm good. I start like
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming all this way.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Let's see how this goes.
All right. It'll be great. Sure. This is way more information than we had previously.
oh, you have no idea. I'm just laying out some more photos of Otto's house.
Okay. Is there anything I can do to help?
No, that's, we should probably get started.
Do you guys have a specific time to leave so that we keep an eye on the clock?
He has to leave at noon?
Okay.
Well, if we're going straight there, then I probably have a little more time.
Okay,
Um,
but if you have to stop at my place, you want to include that or not?
we do want to get lunch, and I do want to be there at 2.
Okay.
And probably brush teeth after lunch.
How long were you
Okay.
planning
I might just give you the keys
for the?
and tell you what things are, because we're gonna stay here.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Okay.
And if I'm gonna stay,
of
unless
course you can ask
the
questions.
two of them also need to go out for lunch too.
Okay.
And Christopher might have to leave a little earlier than his dad.
Yes.
Nate start.
The reason my roommate is going to, but he had to be around to see his medicine changed. And
I kept my original appointment and Clemens and his girlfriend, I don't know, are gonna continue to work.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Can I shut the door?
Sure, yeah. We have some paper and a lot of pens if anybody wants to make.
That's really cool. I see. Okay. Yeah. I have a notebook, but there isn't going to be a test or anything.
Just in case. Is this?
Do you see my presentation or
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, no, I can see just fine. Thank you.
Or Scout?
Perhaps I should. Maybe go over, we'll switch sides.
And you can move the books that way and just bring them out so that you can see that one.
Is there anything you want to say? Or
Well, Clemens has been very generous and kind to help me translate a lot of things, including stuff that didn't relate to Otto. Otto is his main focus, and he will explain in detail why.
Okay.
And why this is so important to definitely at least Germany.
Okay.
But it sort of has some ramifications for the legal community in general, I think. But I don't know anything, I'm not a lawyer.
yeah, I mean, is this on or can I just?
Yeah.
And do you think I need to speak up for the volume or?
I was going to say I might just do an audio recording on my
Sure.
phone.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you're about to get into some of this, but so are you a lawyer or are you a law student?
I'm a historian and a sociologist. So
Oh,
it's,
okay.
I'm from the dark side, so to speak, of the sciences. Yeah, I mean, I might as well just start. I mean, thank you so much for inviting me over to Colorado to talk to you, and it's indeed a great pleasure. And of course, thank you very much for taking the time amidst all this dental issues I heard of that some of you may have. Before we even talk about anything, just some preliminary remarks. So first and foremost, I am here at your service and not the other way around, please. So the same goes for this talk. I am more than happy to talk about anything with you, really. So please interrupt and ask questions should anything arise. However, one small addition, and that should also go without saying, I do not know everything. So especially not everything from the top of my head. So should my memory fail me in regard to any question, I will put down some notes and get back to you in writing, as we did together. Furthermore, there are probably a lot of things that I am unable to talk about because there are no materials, no recordings left. I will try to indicate as often as possible what things can be said with certainty, where can I give reasoned assessments of events, and where I am just left with nothing but reasonable guesses or speculations. And second, I will be relying on this manuscript for the presentation, for one, because I do not wish to muddle up things with my imperfect English, and also I am more than happy to leave this manuscript to you if you want to look things up again or share it with other people, and I will email this to you so you can share it. And same of course goes for the presentation. I will also share this. Third and last, I will not present every little detail of what I'm doing, but it's more about the broad arc and the argument, and since it may be more interesting to get in the conversation together. But again, I'm happy to talk about anything. You may want to share these. This is sort of the preliminary table of contents of the book that I'm working on, just out of interest. I want to talk to you about two things. First, I wish to briefly tell you about my background and what it is I do and why I am now here in this basement of Colorado Springs. So, I am, as I said to you, I'm a trained historian and sociologist, and I'm currently working on my PhD thesis. In order to obtain this degree, I am writing a book which is meant to be published in Germany probably next year, around fall. That's fingers crossed. The funding for this research project, and hence my thesis, comes from the private and independent institute called the Hamburg Institute for Social Research. You can see the building there, the archive, and the library there, and you can see the symbol Hamburger Institut für Sozialforschung down there, just as an impression. The institute itself specializes in questions of European social history, of the 20th century, especially a critical view on the Nazi past of Germany. I do not know whether you have heard of this, but in the late 1990s, the Institute became famous and infamous through an exhibition that for the first time brought to a wider public the attention to the war crimes that were committed by the German army, the Wehrmacht. The exhibition caused a great deal of outrage from parts of the German-speaking public who simply were unwilling to believe that such war crimes had taken place. And here you can see a New York Times article from 1998 next to this Giorgio Armani advertisement that covered the neo-Nazi resistance against this so-called anti-Nazi exhibit in Germany. And this was carried out by the institute that I work for. So the main aim of the thesis is to reconstruct the career of the law publisher Otto Liebmann in Germany and his publishing house of the same name between the years of 1890 and 1933. My aim is to show which works Otto Liebmann published during those years, what different motives and strategies guided his professional actions within the competitive market for legal literature, and how, through his actions, he impacted the development of law and legal science in Germany in the early 20th century. And furthermore, I want to reconstruct how Otto Liebmann was forced to sell his business in late 1933 under the Nazi government. For all of this, I rely on, of course, research literature, but mainly on archival materials, as you see in front of you here, such as letters, statistical materials, old advertisements, catalogs, business circulars, all these kinds of things. So what I wish to talk to you about today, there are three guiding questions. First of all, how did Otto Liebmann become a law publisher in late 19th century Germany? Then second, how did Otto Liebmann establish and sustain a career as a law publisher over 4 decades? And finally, what happened to Otto Liebmann and his family after the seizure of power by the Nazi regime in 1933? And if you look at the preliminary table of contents that I gave you, this is basically the structure of the book. So the first question corresponds with chapters 3 and 4, and the second one, the large chapter 5, covers the second part, the establishment and sustaining of the career, and the third question is especially dealt with in the epilogue of the book. So it's, what is it, chapter 7? Yeah, I'm losing track of myself. So without further ado, how does someone born in the latter half of the 19th century become a law publisher? In order to better get an understanding of this, we need to take a closer look at Otto Liebmann's formative years. He was born on April 24th, 1865 in Mainz, which was then located in the greater area of southeast Prussia in Germany. He was the youngest son, the 7th child of the German Jewish merchant Karl Liebmann, who was buying and selling various goods, mostly crops, in this area. And here you can see a civil register from the town they were living in. And there you can see, I'm just going to go here. There you can see his father, Karl, and then all of his children. And here, down here, is Otto. Born 1865, Mainz, it says here. And Otto Liebmann's son, so your grandfather and your great-grandfather, he once called Otto a child of the Bismarck age. And what he meant there was that Otto's early life and the life of the Liebmann family was influenced by the greater political events in Germany during the years, especially in the mid-1860s and the early 1870s, because those years were shaped by the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. You can see this rather stern fellow down there, who managed to create or to shape the first unified German state, the Kaiserreich, the Imperial Germany in English, through a couple of decisive wars. And you could somewhat, if of course not directly, compare the role of Bismarck in this process to the role that George Washington played as a political figure in sort of unification and the sort of leading figure of political transformation in these years. Now, I deem it not impossible that Otto Liebmann's parents actually named him after Otto von Bismarck, because it was quite a popular name in those years because this figure was so popular, but I have no actual records of this. Anyway, the last of these important armed encounters was that Prussia waged a war against France in 1870, and it is of particular interest here. You see the deployment area of the Prussian armies. You can see the 3 armies there. This is sort of a graphic depiction of how this war played out. And the deployment area is right in the area where the Liebmann family resided at the time. You can see mines up there circled in red where Otto was born. And since Otto's father Karl was a merchant of crops, he made a lucrative business of providing oat for the vast amount of horses that were needed to move an army in those days. And not just, of course, the cavalry, but especially for transporting people and goods across the battle zones. And when the war ended in 1871 in Prussia's favor, Karl Liebmann had made good business, which enabled him and the family to do two things. First, the family was able to move to Frankfurt and settle there. Frankfurt.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, sorry.
And back up. This may be obvious, but Frankenreich, that's France.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And what's
France is everything that's beyond this black line.
and to the east, what is that?
To the east,
uh,
this is Baden. This is part of Germany, so to speak. This was one principality.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And so here's Mainz. In Frankfurt, sadly, it's not yet. Frankfurt is sort of here, so it's also in the area where they moved.
Okay.
And Frankfurt, I mean, this is a colorized picture of what Frankfurt looked like around 1900. It was one of the economic and cultural centers of Prussia. And and there he was able to provide a good education for his sons. So especially the males in those days. Otto's oldest brother Jakob, for example, he went to university to become a lawyer in the Frankfurt area, and something that was rather unlikely for someone from a Jewish family in those days. You can see his dissertation here. That's a dissertation he wrote on some Roman private law problem that considered obligations. And of course, in those days, these dissertations are written in Latin. So you can see here Jacobus Liebmann, and on the second page, it says parentibus, which is Latin for "to my parents." So he dedicated his dissertation to his parents. And another brother of Otto Louis, so this is an older picture of an older brother of Otto Louis. He studied chemistry at the University of Zurich in Switzerland and Strasbourg in France, and went on to become a successful researcher in the field of chemistry and a philanthrope in Frankfurt. So what you can see is that in one generation, so to speak, the family went from someone who sold crops to people who were doctors of law and doctors of chemistry. So that's a very rapid social move and upwards, so to speak. Now, Otto himself, it seems, profited mostly from growing up within one of the centers of cultural and intellectual life. It's told in some sources that he spent a lot of time during his childhood at this very famous antiquarian bookstore named after the owners Josef Bär. So you can see the front of that bookstore here, and you can also see this is a lithography, I think, or an etching of what this bookstore looked like from the inside, and sort of you can somewhat imagine that Otto spent his free time between those books. This is downstairs, where you have like the counters and bookshelves, and also this is upstairs, and etching some more books. Now, it is not improbable that this environment had a bearing on his decision to enter a career as a bookseller or publisher himself. So therefore, after a brief stint with a regiment of the Prussian army in the nearby town of Darmstadt, he entered such a training route. So first he was an apprentice with a publishing house in Frankfurt called Moritz Diesterweg, which is sort of also quite famous around the Frankfurt area because they did school books. So of course that's also a very viable line of publishing if you do school books. And then he spent some time actually working as a bookseller in Leipzig. Now Leipzig is also one hotbed for publishing in Germany, and he spent time there as a bookseller, and then he finally spent some time as an apprentice with a printing and binding company in Berlin called H.S. Hermann, which was a very large printing company who did everything from printing books to lithographies, and also did this binding that you see. They did all the bindings of books, which of course in those days was quite important because there wasn't these things did not exist. Probably as part of his training also, he did what we would nowadays call an overseas stay or a visit abroad, since he went to New York in late 1888. Now, once again, this is from the Civil Register, and I know this is barely decipherable, but this is Otto moving at September 2nd, 1888 to America, New York. And here you can see, and excuse the quality, here you can see his name on one of the passenger lists that actually brought him to New York as a tourist from Germany. But it says tourists. I'm not sure whether that's actually, I do not know what he actually did in New York, because it's quite difficult to find out if someone who is, let's say, sort of a nobody, what they did there. If he, you know, he had been famous at the time, of course, there would be recordings in the newspapers here, over here, but actually, it's quite difficult to say what he did. But my guess is, since all of the stores, especially Alfred Lorenz and Moritz Diesterweg, they had sort of dependencies in New York, because they were also selling books to the German readers that were living in the States. So maybe he spent some time there for a couple of months just to get to know the area, and again, as part of his training. And
Just, I'm wondering if the more recent relatives of Annie Wolf
yeah,
might have come with him or already been here. And then there were also some relatives in California
yeah.
that they might have corresponded with, but I don't know if you can find those things or not.
Yeah, I was wondering, because of course I do not know whether he just simply arrived in New York and moved from there to, for instance, California to visit the Livingstons,
Right.
or whether he's actually stayed in New York. That's because.
And I think he may have visited Louisville or something.
Ah, yes, because the Livingston family also, they had something there. Yeah, that's possible. But again, it's very hard to find, especially if I do my research in Germany to what's going on in.
Right, and I'm sure, well, since all of those people are passed, they would know. It
Yeah.
would be difficult to.
Yeah, but again, it would be sort of a great accidental find. Yeah.
Okay.
How old was he when he visited?
He was 23 years old.
Okay.
It says here 29, but that's definitely wrong. And I double checked this, so it's definitely him, because there's a time frame matches. So it usually took about a week to get over there, and I know when he left, and I know when this recording is from. So he moved first to a port in Germany, then to Southampton in UK, and then with a steamship over to New York. So he returned to Frankfurt May 13th, 1889. Yes, that's correct. And he had now spent some years working and gaining experience in every branch of the book trade. So with a publishing house, as with a bookseller, and with a printing and binding company. So 6 months later, on January 1st, 1890, he opened his publishing house in Berlin. And here you can see a picture of the first business circular that basically announces the opening of the publishing house. And here you have his signature down there, and also here's an ad to the right of a very sort of famous newspaper where it is announced that he has now opened his business. Now, some sources say that his mother, Otto Liebmann, supported him with a loan of about 10,000 Reichsmark. It's actually quite difficult to say what that would be in today's money in US dollars, but let's just say that it was a decent sum for a young entrepreneur, because he was only 24 years old when he opened his business in Berlin. And he would lead this publishing house as the sole owner for the next 43 years, up until late 1933.
Was it common at the time for people to open businesses just under their own name?
Yes, that was very common, because in those days, of course you can see this also here, they prided themselves of being the owner of that business, so they basically only gave it their name. So Moritz Diesterweg, Alfred Lorenz, of course, Heinz Hermann, these are simply all the names of the owner, or the first owner. If it was sort of a more generational family business, they would usually keep that name, of course, yeah. Because those businesses, publishing houses today, if you think about Penguin and Random House, they are vast companies, but in those days, these were actually quite small businesses. I think that Otto Liebmann's publishing house at his peak had about 12 people working for it. So that's everything from the typists to the editors and everything. So it's quite small. I mean, the fact that he was able to have his business for such an extended period of time under his own name for over 40 years, and across multiple crises, I mean, such as the First World War, the years of inflation during the early 1920s, and the Great Depression of the late 1920s, which of course also affected the European mainland quite significantly, now brings me to the second question: how did Otto Liebmann establish and sustain a career as a law publisher over 4 decades? For this, I think we once again must come to this remark by Carl Wilhelm about being a child of the Bismarck age. Now you see that Bismarck age and the founding of the German Empire in 1871 and the subsequent years up until around 1900, they heralded a huge shift in the field of legal publishing. Since any political turn of events usually has, of course, a bearing on the field of law and therefore on the field of legal publishing. And to illustrate this, I'll point your attention to 3 things. First, there was a change simply in legislation. There was an abundance of raw material crucial to legal publishers. Simply a lot of laws were passed. So the newly founded state did not have laws, and it needed laws because it wanted to govern the area. So between around 1870 and 1900, major legal reforms were passed, encompassing every imaginable branch of law. So private law, penal law, commercial law, everything. And most of that legal content of these reforms was new and unknown to legal professionals. So they needed to understand, to learn it, to be able to apply it. So therefore, the market for legal publishing grew immensely because all the laws had to be processed further through the treatment and presentation by legal professionals. And this is clearly mirrored in the statistic, which you can see here, that actually from 1,020 titles in 1870, you see a growth of up to about 2,599 there. Oh, sorry, but you get the idea. So that's a growth of about 155%. And by 1914, the overall amount had grown about 185% compared to 1870. And of course, one aspect that's also very important is that these laws apply to now a huge area. Because before the founding of Imperial Germany, you had very small principalities that all had their own legislation and laws, some from French, from Roman, and now there was a huge area that was covered by one kind of legislation, which of course means that the market for legal literature simply expanded.
Do you have any info on whether publishing as a whole expanded significantly during that period?
Yeah, of course, because also there was an upsurge in the attendance of universities, and the universities, for instance, grew. There were a lot more students, so therefore also the fields like the natural sciences, they had an upsurge, and mathematics and all these. And also what the founding of Imperial Germany meant that there was a huge urge to get the population alphabetized. Is that a word you say? So that to make them able to read and write during those years. What's the word for that?
To make them literate.
Literate, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. There were lots of great efforts to make the population literate. And so only by around 1900 you had a literacy quota of about 90%. So that of course meant that more people could read and therefore bought more books and all these. So that again, as you say, you are quite right, there was an upsurge in the whole area of publishing and magazines and journals and everything. Yeah.
I mean, would that be about proportional to the rest, or was the legal publishing especially larger in growth?
Of course, there was. You cannot compare this, of course, to things like popular literature, which had much greater numbers of editions and of. But again, it was quite significant compared, for instance, also to fields such as history, because in history it's not an applied science. You only sit down and read a book. Where of course we will get to these in legal science. You have commentaries and statute books, and so it's the greater variety of someone who actually needs to know the law in order to apply it. So I would say that's, again, I mean, it's a significant growth just in relative numbers, while of course the absolute numbers might be smaller, for instance, than in popular literature. So then second, there were of course the newly founded state also needed more lawyers and judges, because it needed professionally trained people who were able to apply those new laws. And I mean, as far as statistical material is available, you can observe here how the number grows. Between 1884 and 1915, the total number of judges grew by 52%, and the number of practicing lawyers grew by 200%.
So the lawyers are the red.
Yes, sorry, the lawyers are blue down there,
Ah,
and the judges is this red number you can see. It doesn't really accurately depict the relative growth, but yeah. And of course, they were not only sort of a functional elite of a state, but they were also customers of legal literature. So, and next to these sort of sheer shifts in numbers, there was also a very significant shift in the way that legal professionals, these are the students of law. You can see also here a massive growth there. And there was also sort of a shift in the way in which lawyers and legal professionals consume legal literature. So there's a very, now for us, from looking back from today, a very funny quote from an acquaintance of Otto Liebmann, Hermann Staub, who said, "Lawyers and judges are now no longer they are no position to read a monograph. There is simply no time for that in the age of steam and electricity. The greatest joy for judges and lawyers is to be subscribed to 1 or 2 legal journals and to read an article here and there. The shorter the better for the article, since it increases the prospect of it being read." And simultaneously, of course, there was a huge competition in this field of legal publishing, because again, it was a growing field, and it was a viable business opportunity. And another contemporary of Otto Liebmann, he said that the general upsurge, you mentioned, the general upsurge of the book trade in Germany and in Berlin since 1870 does have its downsides. The largesse and the freedom of trade created the hotbed from which the booksellers shot up like mushrooms, and leading to an overly large competition. And once again, you can also see that growth here in the statistical data, how many specialized publishers, so not only law, but simply specialized publishers were active or were founded, how many businesses were founded during this time. Now, what did this all mean for Otto Liebmann when he opened his business in 1890? I think there are 2 things that are very important. First, he was entering a branch of business that was growing and would continue to grow, but also at the same time, he was a latecomer to the field, because relatively speaking to the year of 1870, the field of legal publishing can be divided into 3 groups. So first, there are the ones that were established before 1870, and they would now, they faced the challenge of adapting their business to the new surroundings. And then there was the second group, which you could call the avant-garde. And you can see at the founding days, 1870, 71, 71, 72, those companies specialized in law and legal science that were established at the time or just after the founding of the nation state. And of course, these companies were established more or less in the hope or the expectations that there would now be a lucrative business in this area, which is why they were often founded also in Berlin, which I'm going to talk about later a bit. So the third group, they were accordingly the latecomers. Those that entered the field of legal publishing sometime after this watershed of 1870, and they more or less had to create their business opportunities in a competitive and crowded surrounding. And of course, you can see here that 1890, relatively speaking, Otto Liebmann was quite late. So that's, of course, for my research very fascinating, because the question then is, how did he manage to establish a leading publishing house in the end against the fact that he was a latecomer to this field? So what do you do if the phone's already been invented and you're 20 years late? How do you do this? Well, first of all, he of course established his business in Berlin. After the unification of the German state in 1871, Berlin became the single capital city of this state. So basically Germany got its own Washington, so to speak. Whereas before the old principalities had their own capitals, Berlin became the center of political and economic activity, because the government and the administrative institutions, including all the important legal institutions, such as the Department of Justice, were located in Berlin, especially within this specific district that I've marked up here in yellow. This was the government district in Berlin. And for law publishers, it was all important to be quite literally close to this area of the city. Because seeking and maintaining the personal contacts with the government officials, administrators, and other legally trained staff promise business opportunities such as printing orders, simply being informed about what was going on, or planned legislative projects, and all these things. Of course, it was about acquiring suitable authors for legal journals or other publications. So if you take a look at one of the early catalogs of the publishing house, you can see it here on the left. This is the first catalog of publications that was issued after the first 2 years that the publishing house had been in business. You can also see that he tried out quite different things at first. So it wasn't a full-on fledged legal publishing house from the get-go. He actually, the first thing that he published, that's my translation there, it was called Literarische Wochenblatt. So it was the weekly paper for literature, which basically covered reviews of newly published popular literature and some small essays and something. It was, it was cut off quite soon, but that had nothing to do with law. And the second one, which was also quite interesting, I don't know whether you can, it's somewhat, you can maybe have a guess. It was called A Comparative Depiction of the Relative Strength of European Armies During Peacetime. So where you can see here, you have the various countries, and then you have the various branches of the military, which is of course, sorry, no, it's not very visible, but you have the various branches of the military, and you can compare now by simply looking at the colored map, which country has the strongest army overall, or which has the strongest branches. And that was, of course, maybe due to his background from military service, but again, it's still not very something that's quite to do with law. He only made real strides in this area in 1896. And I would say he outsmarted his competition, you could say, by establishing hitherto somewhat unknown publication formats within the realm of legal science. And again, I want to give 2 examples. First of all, in 1896, an important statute book, or legal code, as you would say in Germany, Gesetzbuch, was passed, named the Bürgerliche Gesetzbuch, and it dealt with all the questions of private law, contracts, obligations, marriage, inheritance, everything. So this was, of course, hugely important, not only for the legal professionals, but also for laymen and women, who now had to obey that code. And hence, it was of utmost importance to make an edition of this statute book available to the masses. And here Otto Liebmann published the so-called Lilliput edition, or midget edition. Yeah, there's an edition of this there. And it was, excuse the expression, but it was dirt cheap. It was one mark. So much cheaper than all the other ones. And it was easily accessible, and was also designed, as you can see, it was designed to fit in a waistcoat pocket or something. So you would always have it at the ready. You could always know what was the matter. And you can see one of this edition, as you can have a look there. And here are some advertisements for this edition, which play on its size. So it says now, of course, these are not to scale now. It says now, original publication. That's the original size, and this was sort of now as part of another book. And also there's an ad where you can see where it says here, size like this ad, so 7 by 10 centimeters. So he sort of tried to actively make people aware of actually how small and practical this was by the ads that he placed around this. And it was also, which is I think is quite interesting while we're at it, it says here, for the holidays of courts, because there was a 2-month period in the summer where the courts weren't working. So he placed this ad to say, if you need to learn the new law, now's the time that you maybe better get yourself one of these small pocket editions that you can take on your holiday.
And you published these ads in the newspaper? Or?
Yes. There was a newspaper by this sort of interest group of booksellers, and the booksellers would flick through and look, what can I get for my bookshop, and put in the windows or something. And this is actually from this, so it's designed to appeal to the booksellers. To say, now it's for the holidays are coming up. You better have this. Now the other groundbreaking invention, so to speak, of Otto Liebmann was the so-called Deutsche Juristenzeitung, or German newspaper for all of the legal profession, that he also first published in January 1896. And here you can see, we will get to that in a moment. I mean, first of all, the idea was simple as it was ingenious. Instead of publishing a very specialized legal journal only covering the law of torts or, I don't know, any specialized field of penal law, this journal aims at covering every issue that was of concern to the legal profession. Here you can see the the title head of this journal and of the first edition, Berlin, January 1st, 1896. Also, instead of being published every couple of months or so, as was still the case with a lot of legal journals, you may know scientific journals, they only have 2 or 3 editions every year. It would be published every fortnight, so every 2 weeks. Therefore, much more regularly and much more able to be up to date with whatever was going on within the field of law. And finally, now if you think back at the quote from Hermann Staub, an acquaintance, it was aimed at very brief, concise, short articles and opinion pieces, so not long scientific treatises, but very concise, short pieces. And actually, Otto Liebmann, he had his own red ink pen where he would always cut down all the offers that he would get. And it was quite famous, his red ink pen became quite famous actually in the legal profession for, he was always cutting down these, because he said they are too long, nobody will read this, you have to write shorter. So, you know. And now, in the words of the publisher, this magazine wanted to be, and I quote here, a journal when compared to other newspapers, but a newspaper when compared to other journals. So, this way. In order to gain attention for this particular venture, Otto Liebmann managed to acquire 3 reputable legal professionals of his time to superficially act as the editors. So the aforementioned lawyer Hermann Staub, a judge, Melchior Stenglein, and a legal scholar, Paul Laband. Now I say superficially because Otto Liebmann always was the main editor since the first day. The names of these 3 professionals were only meant as an ornament that would sort of vow for the reputation of the journal. But neither Staub nor Stenglein nor Laband were actually really included in the everyday business of editing the journal. In fact, there is an anecdote about the editorial board meeting told by your grandfather, great-grandfather. So my father often told the story of how the first and only ever editorial meeting of this journal was held in a boozy manner at the cafe just here at the Potsdamer Platz, which is basically like a cocktail bar. And you can see here now there's a caricature that says the first editorial board meeting of the German newspaper for lawyers. And you can see here, this is Otto Liebmann standing up with a cigar, and he's toasting, he's raising his toast to Melchior Stenglein. And here is Paul Laband also with his glass, and Staub, and they are surrounded by champagne and wine and having a laugh, basically. This journal would be the bedrock of the publishing house over the next 4 decades. You can see, you can see the announcement that this particular journal will appear.
Where did you find that illustration?
Oh,
What's the source of that?
This illustration is from a special edition of this journal, which was issued in 1925 to the 60th birthday of Otto Liebmann. And this was edited by Karl Wilhelm, so his son, and another main editor of the journal at the time, and they did a lot of caricatures. I'm going to show another one later, and I can send you all of these. We talked about this. I will send you all of these, but they were printed in this special edition so as to have a little bit of banter about the origins, so to say, of the publishing house. But what I thought was interesting, it is a caricature, but actually sort of this quote from Karl Wilhelm proves that actually happened. So it's not that much a caricature. It's basically, you know, a shared anecdote.
Right.
Oh, Chris, just wanted to let you know it's about 12:20. Just if you're
We should probably get on soon.
Oh, should I hurry?
we should let him finish.
Should I hurry? I mean, and otherwise it's recorded.
Okay. Well, Nate has to go too. 'Cause he's going to.
Back up your camera. If you're okay with leaving it recording.
I'm sorry that I'm taking so long.
That's okay.
Start recording the audio on my phone.
How quickly do you think we can eat? Or where do you want to be? We haven't figured that out yet.
I'm not hungry.
Okay,
And just keep the brushing.
maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's an hour away, so we gotta leave by 1,
Okay.
and we should eat before then.
Or
Or at least I want to eat. At least I want to eat. Or I guess we could eat on the way, but I mean, I do want to get a good meal because I'm going to.
I would definitely finish by 1, just to say.
Okay.
Okay, so we gotta, we still gotta eat. So, and then.
Yeah. No, I'll try to finish within the next like 15 minutes. So that's fine. 15 to 20.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, this journal would be sort of really the bedrock of the publishing house. And due to its novel form, it would become one of the most respected journals in the field of law and legal science. It was also an independent journal, so it was not being published or edited either by an official institution, such as the Ministry of Justice or something, and it was not bound to one of the associations of or interest groups of the legal professions, so like the German Society of Lawyers or Judges, like these interest groups that they had their own journals. I'd like to keep that independence of the journal in mind, but because it will become relevant later on. Furthermore, of course, having a periodical publication, such as a journal financed through subscriptions, of course, also meant a regular stream of revenue for the publishing house. And this journal had a lot of subscriptions. I came across some numbers, not a lot of figures, but some at least. For instance, in 1911, it had about 11,700. And if you compare these to the active legal practitioners, that means that about every other legal practitioner was a subscriber to this journal, which is quite a lot. And the next important undertaking by Otto Liebmann concerned a large legislative reform project. You see, after this Bürgerliche Gesetzbuch, this private statute book, was passed in 1896, the attention of the state legislature turned to the reform of penal law, which has been largely been untouched since the early 1870s. And since once again the idea was to pass a whole new statute book, and this book would of course not be simply drafted from scratch, the Ministry of Justice advertised for a printing order for a large comparative work showing the state of penal legislation in other European countries compared to Germany, and therefore being sort of a reference for the legislative reform. So to look how is England dealing with criminals, how is France doing this, and what can we learn from them, and how can we incorporate this kind of knowledge about this comparative knowledge into our own legal reform. And Otto Liebmann managed to acquire that printing order since he already in the 1890s had been involved in a larger publishing project on this topic, which had failed, but that's another story. And between the years of 1906 and 1909, Otto Liebmann's business published a vast 16-volume work. You can see the cover of one of those volumes here, called The Comparative Depiction of German and International Penal Law. And it brought together all sorts of reputable legal scholars from the field of penal and international penal law. And again, these 16 volumes, they were meant as a preparatory work for the legislative reform process. This reform process also ultimately failed due to disagreements on the political level, but nevertheless it was a huge accomplishment for the publisher, and it earned him an honorary doctorate of law from the University of Heidelberg, awarded him in late 1908. So the trained publisher could now, it named himself no longer Otto Liebmann Publisher, but it is now Otto Liebmann Doctor of Law. And this honorary doctorate is very significant because if you look here, when he received it, he was only 42 or 43 years old. And that is important because usually these honorary doctorates in this field, they were handed out sort of like lifetime achievement awards. So you received them when you were in the 60s, or when you were retiring, you got them sort of as like a symbolic reward. But he actually got it when he was sort of in the midst of his career, sort of recognizing his work that he had already done with his publishing house. And here I've drafted up a table where you can see this comparison where you have these people who receive them like 60, 67, 65, 60, and someone from this, of course, for the 50th birthday, but Otto Liebmann actually was the youngest to receive this. And of course, you can also see how his standing that he now had acquired through this honorary doctorate, it also changed the way he behaved sort of as a publisher, because he basically started to publish under his own name in his own journal. If you look here you have the different volumes sorted by year of the Deutsche Juristenzeitung, his main legal journal. And here you can see how many articles he wrote per year under his own name. And this black arrow shows he received his honorary doctorate here, and basically after that it's sort of more or less on an upward trend. So he starts to involve himself not only as a publisher, but also as an author, writing opinion pieces in his own journal. And he cemented his standing within this field of legal publishing through his honorary doctorate. And also, he quite literally cemented his standing in the Berlin's milieu of the intellectual elite through the building of this private home that you have pictures of on the table. It was quite an impressive private villa in the famous district of Berlin-Wilmersdorf, which was built in the years between 1909 and 1911. And this would now house, by this time, Otto Liebmann and his wife, Fanny. They had married in 1897, and now there are 3 children, Margarete, which was called Gretel oftentimes, Irma, and Karl Wilhelm, nicknamed Willi, as I've learned from you. And through these developments, you can also comprehend what I would consider quite a decisive way which distinguished Otto Liebmann from other law publishers of his time. So he was not only publishing treatises on penal law, or he was not only just publishing journals, but he was also the sole editor of his journal, and he was at the same time a writer. And therefore he's quite actively involved himself in the development of law and legal science. And I mean, only to give you, that was sort of my illustrations. If you think about the theater stage, you have front stages, of course, and backstage. And usually, when you think about publishers, you consider them sort of being involved with the backstage. So sort of making everything sure, printing and binding, to make the authors on the front stage shine. Because that's the job of the publisher, to make an author successful so that the business is successful. But actually now Otto Liebmann sort of moved between front and backstage, right? Because he was also an author. He was writing opinion pieces on law at the same time, while being also backstage a publisher. So that's very interesting, because that's something that's very unusual for, that's sort of not very something I could find with any other law publisher of this time. This sort of, I wouldn't say trespassing, but sort of trespassing between his roles. Was he a publisher, or is he a lawyer? Because he calls himself Doctor of Law, but he never visited law school. So that's very interesting, these different roles that he had this time. And the influence that he had on the field of legal science can also be illustrated by another caricature that was published in 1925, which we talked about briefly. Now it's called the Jurist Catcher. And are you familiar with the saga of the Pied Piper? Yes, a bit. Because, as you know, the town of Hamelin, where I grew up by chance, the town of Hamelin is plagued by rats, and the government of the city hires a piper that promises to rid the city of the plague. But he succeeds, but he doesn't get his payment. So the piper then mesmerizes all the children and takes them out of the city. With this caricature, actually, this is Otto, and he's not. He doesn't have a flute, but a quill, or his red ink pen that he always uses. And what people are following him are this sort of amorphous mass of people who can be identified quite clearly as sort of black robes, lawyers and legal professionals. And they are sort of dancing to his tune, basically, with his quill that he's using. What is that caption? That caption is the jurist catcher. So not the catcher of rats, but the catcher of legal professionals. Okay. So yeah, and that's also from this publication, special edition that his son made for him for his it was his 60th birthday. Yes. And it's interesting because it's an interesting drawing because it shows the creative ways in which contemporaries of Otto Liebmann reflected upon the fact that he, as a publisher, took very active part in the direction that legal science and law actually took, quite literally. And so it would go for the next couple of decades. Otto Liebmann went on to publish both hardcore legal scientific works, such as a series of highly regarded commentaries that carried over the principle of the pocket textbook. They were aptly named the Taschenkommentare, so the pocket commentaries or the short commentaries. So Liebmann's short commentaries, you can see it, that's also an ad. And they were sold in vast numbers. I mean, if you look here, they have been sold, 53,000 pieces have been sold already. This down here, it says, this work is known by every lawyer and every economist. It's known in every institution. And this new edition is, has to be bought by, of course, has to be bought again. And he would also dabble with other interesting publication formats, such as a series of crime novels. You can see this here. It's down there. It's this one. This one, yes. This is one book as a part of a series of crime novels that he tried to establish, which was meant to popularize legal proceedings to a lay audience through crime stories. I have brought one of them with me, and it's called Criminal Detective Dr. Schretter, written by a retired judge, hence a legal professional, which wanted to give a proper and accurate insight of how the police would go about solving a crime. But that series was not successful after all, because as it turns out, trained legal professionals are not automatically good writers. So the reviews were quite mixed, shall we say. Otto Liebmann also managed to steer his publishing house through the two major economic crises of the 1920s, although how exactly he did this is very hard to say. It was definitely not ill management that would bring the publishing house down in the end, but the seizure of power by the fanatically anti-Semitic Nazi government in early 1933, which led to the sale of Otto Liebmann's publishing house to another German publisher, Heinrich Beck. Now, this brings me to the third and final question. What happened to Otto Liebmann, his publishing house, and the family during the events of 1933 and afterwards? Especially this question regarding the, let's call it the fate of the business, is one that has been debated in German public time and again. Why? It's because Otto Liebmann was forced to sell his business to another publishing house called C.H. Beck. You can see the symbol up there. And this publishing house is today the largest legal publishing house in Germany, and not just for legal science but also for popular literature. It has two branches, popular literature and legal scientific literature. Therefore, the question of whether this publishing house profited from buying up a German Jewish business under the Nazis has come up more than once. In 2013, so about 10 years ago, this came to a head when the Beck Publishing House released two separate commemorative publications on its own 250th anniversary. So one was written for the law branch by this weird guy called Uwe Wesel on the left. He did the law, so he wrote the publication for the law branch of the publishing house. And this Stefan Ebelich, he wrote the one for the popular literature branch of the business. And the two books, these two works by these two authors, they differed quite significantly when it came to the events surrounding that sale. The one written for the law branch was mainly apologetic and saw no real issue in the sale. The one written for the popular branch was quite more critical. And since then, this topic has come up time and again, most recently in a book only published a couple of months back. You can see it down there. A couple of months back by two legal scholars. They wish to give a critical insight on German legal scholarship. And when it comes to the question of property, they actually include the sale of Otto Liebmann as one prime example to discuss what happened, what can happen with property. I can send that to you. Again, it was only published 2 months ago or something. I would be glad to send that. Thank you. So the question is, what happened? Heinrich Beck, you can see him here. He was the owner of Beck Publishing at the time. He bought per contract of December 12, 1933, the whole publishing house of Otto Liebmann. Everything from the publishing rights, all of the works, the staff, and even the business inventory, so desks, chairs, and the storage of printing paper. How could that have happened? It is quite clear that without the seizure of power by the Nazis, this sale would never have happened. The company would have been taken over by Otto's son Karl Wilhelm, who already had worked at the publishing house for almost a decade, or a little over a decade actually, and he had been definitely being prepared to be the successor of his father. So, as was the case with the small businesses in Germany at the time, this was meant to be a family business handed down through generations. It was only the fact that Otto Liebmann was, by the racial definition of the Nazis at least, of Jewish descent that forced him to offer his publishing house for sale. That was mainly due to early acts of racially motivated legislation, and especially the so-called Schriftleitergesetz, so the law on editors, which was passed in October 1933, which ruled that each and every editor of any kind of journal had to be quote-unquote Aryan, or of Aryan descent. It was meant to come into force on January 1st, 1934, so quite soon. And this law made it impossible for Otto Liebmann or Karl Wilhelm, his son, to continue in any position, to continue in the position that he had held for well over 30 years as the leading editor of the German newspaper for lawyers. And realizing that his publishing house had no future with either him or his son in leading position, he saw himself pressured into offering it up for sale. Various publishing houses refused the offer. Heinrich Beck in the end took it up, but not for the sum that Otto Liebmann had demanded. So he had demanded 300,000 gold marks. So basically, gold marks mean that it was safe against inflation. So it was money that was actually coins of gold. He quoted for 250,000 gold mark. Heinrich Beck himself had been incentivized to seize the opportunity by a man named Hans Frank. That's here, up there. Hans Frank was at the time the so-called Reichsrechtsführer, the Reich leader for the law. And he was mainly occupied in 1933 with the co-optation, the Gleichschaltung, of a whole legal profession and the legal publishing business. So the Nazis were quite actively trying to get the legal profession on their side through repressive measures. Of course, trying to push out all the Jews from the profession, so the Jewish lawyers, Jewish professors, everything, and also, of course, gaining control of the publication so that they could control what was published. Hans Frank had an interest in this Aryanization of Otto Liebmann's publishing house for one reason in particular. Remember that I said that Otto Liebmann's journal was formally independent, meaning that it was not under control from either governmental body or an interest group of the legal professions. In other words, Hans Frank had no chance at that time to put this journal under the control of the Nazis simply by co-opting either the governmental body or the interest group. So if you look at, for instance, this association, the German Association for Lawyers, they were co-opted, and therefore, of course, their journal was co-opted. But again, Otto Liebmann's business had an independent journal. So the question now was, for Hans Frank at least, the question was how do we get control over this very important journal that is very important in order to cement our the promulgation of our quote-unquote legal thought, you know. But seeing the publishing house and accordingly the journal and the important commentaries that Liebmann had published in the hands of an Aryan publisher such as Heinrich Beck was, of course, was the one option to take. So therefore, Hans Frank persuaded Heinrich Beck to take up the offer that Liebmann made, probably in exchange for favorable contacts to the Nazi government in Berlin. And this ultimately helped the Beck Publishing House to become an influential law publisher during the Nazi years and beyond. It's very important. It's only basically through this transaction that Beck Publishing became a very important law publisher, and he managed to maintain this position also after the end of the war. Now, I put emphasis on the role of Hans Frank here because there is clear evidence that when Heinrich Beck underwent the process of denazification after 1945, he actively tried to play down the role of Hans Frank that Hans Frank had played in the purchase of this publishing house. Why? Because Hans Frank by then was no longer the Reich leader of law, but he had been the so-called slaughter of Poland, the Schlechter von Polen, actively engaged in the Holocaust. Frank had been put on trial, you can see him here, trial and sentenced to death in the Nuremberg trials. In other words, after the war, it was inopportune for Heinrich Beck to make a great deal of Hans Frank's involvement with the purchase, since it would have jeopardized his chances of rebuilding his career under the occupying powers in Germany. And I can share those sources if you like, but to me it's quite clear. Now, Heinrich Beck was at the time living in Munich, so he had to answer to the Americans, and he had been barred for a time actually from his job because of his involvement with the Nazis, and he was only sort of cleared of some of the charges, and the clearance of these charges, of course, also involved, once again, downplaying his relation to Hans Frank that he had had. And accordingly, this involvement, this sort of relation of Heinrich Beck and Hans Frank was also played down by the apologetic depiction of the events that were published in 2013, so by this man. Also, Heinrich Beck had to answer to restitution claims that were made by Karl Wilhelm Liebmann after the war. And Heinrich Beck decided to pay Karl Wilhelm Liebmann the difference between the sum that Otto Liebmann had demanded and what he had actually paid. So he paid another 50,000 marks to Karl Wilhelm Liebmann. Why? The question is, that's not very important. Why did he do this? This is also a point where these two depictions from 2013, they differ. The one covering the popular literature branch called this transaction an indirect admission of guilt on the part of Heinrich Beck, while the book covering the legal branch labeled it a noble gesture and an expression of Heinrich Beck's cordial character. Let me be frank and excuse my language, this is bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. It's bordering on mischievous and evil to say that actually what Heinrich Beck did was a noble gesture or any expression of a cordial character. To anyone who can think straight, it is clear that Heinrich Beck, after 1945, was keen to settle this matter out of court. Because once again, he was not willing to jeopardize his chances as a law publisher. If he had not settled with Karl Wilhelm Liebmann over this sum, there was a chance that this whole dealing, the whole Aryanization of the publishing house would have gone to a restitution court. And also, if it had gone to a restitution court, there had been a chance that he had been found guilty, which may have barred him from acting as a legal publisher, or paying much more money as compensation. And he did not want this to happen. So in order to do this, he simply settled the matter out of court. So it is clear that that was a strategic move, that was not anything to do with his noble character, it was a strategic move by him in order to lay this issue to rest. That was,
What year was that?
that was the mid-1950s. I can put that to you and show it when it's settled.
I know my grandfather Carl needed the influence of money, so he on his part was willing to settle rather than have it being drawn out.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and that's another way where you could say that Heinrich Beck abused the position of your grandfather in this case, because he knew that it was very expensive to go to court also. And yeah, but I look up, there is correspondence on this, and I look up the dates when this happens. So bear with me for a moment. Correspondence on the settlement. So let me, I wish there is no doubt about this. I actually held an event in Hamburg a couple of years ago. Here you can see myself. There's Stefan Ebelich, who wrote the critical account of that, of those events. There's actually Ute Schneider, who's a book historian and historian of publishing. And we did an event a couple of years ago that once again we tried to set this right. We wanted not to make the Beck publishing house get away with this depiction up here. Maybe to some effect, I don't know. As for the fate of the family, very few details are known of their living conditions after the forced sale of the business. It is clear from the documents, however, that they were subjected to all of the various persecution measures by the Nazi government. For instance, wearing the yellow star, wearing the middle name Sarah in Israel, having their assets taken away, and of course, at some point, their properties. In 1938, shortly after the so-called Kristallnacht, the staged pogrom against the Jewish population, Karl Wilhelm Liebmann was taken to the concentration camp of Sachsenhausen, where he spent about 2 weeks being forced to do hard labor and abused physically and mentally. Up here you can see a picture of Jewish population being taken to the concentration camp in late 1938. These events, they were designed to force the Jews out of the country. And indeed, Karl Wilhelm, his wife Hilde, and their son Wolfgang did leave shortly after. You have told me that they actually had plans and the necessary documentation to go to the United States, which I didn't know up to this point. But the ship they had tickets for was seized, and left them with no option but to go wherever the next best ship would take them, which was Ecuador. And here Karl Wilhelm would, under difficult circumstances, rebuild his career in the publishing business, mainly through the opening of 2 bookstores named Su Libreria, so your library, is that correct?
Your bookstore.
Your bookstore, yeah. You also, there is this, for his 60th birthday, there is this small book that actually, you can see him in this balloon that says Su Libreria, because he's disseminating books for the people in Quito. And I think the bookstore under this name still exists in Quito to this day, right?
Yes, Ecuador nationalized things, and my father was going to inherit it, but he was prevented again because of nationalization laws.
Yes, okay, yeah, I see. The rest of the immediate family remained in Germany. Otto's wife, Lili Fanny, had already died in May of 1938 after a long illness. Otto, Margarete, and Irma Liebmann were forced to move out of their home in Berlin-Wilmersdorf in late 1941. And they were forced to move in a so-called House for Jews, Judenhaus, in Berlin-Charlottenburg. And here Otto Liebmann passed away from a weak heart on July 13, 1942. You can see here is the death notification that Karl Wilhelm published in a magazine that was actually published in New York, so from exile. And a few months later, in December 1942, Margarete and Irma were taken by the Gestapo and sent to the concentration camp of Auschwitz. Here you can see the transport list that was kept by the Gestapo. You can see the name here, Liebmann, Irma, Sarah, the forced middle name, her date of birth, where she was living, what she was doing, and only says worker. I'm not sure. It was probably just because they had to put something in. Both of them, so Margarete and Irma, were announced dead after the war. It's not sure what happened to them, but of course they were taken to Auschwitz, so it's certain that they were killed in the concentration camps. So the family business was forced off. The family was ripped apart, and in part dispersed, and in part murdered by the National Socialist Germany. And there is for me no other way to end than on this somber statement. I hope I've given you insight into the history of the business and his life's work of Otto Liebmann as a publisher. I thank you very much for your attention. I, of course, will answer every question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
These first 4 books, Clemens gifted me when he arrived.
It's very nice.
And, you've probably seen in the movies, the lawyers carry these huge legal volumes here in the United States, and he made this commonly available.
Yes.
That's mind-blowing to me. And something, he published this, right?
Yes. Yeah.
One of the most respected is
Goethe.
Goethe.
Yes.
And so he published this a play.
Yes, this is sort of like it's a play on the material of a very important play that Goethe wrote, Faust. Maybe you know the Faust story, because the plot of Faust revolves around a contract, which is of course a private law issue. There was sort of a funny play that sort of moved this material of Faust around to make it about something that's mattered to the legal profession, and that's what he published. Yes.
And this?
Yes, this is actually from Otto's brother Louis, because he was a philanthrope in Frankfurt and he was very interested in sort of literary history, and he wrote this small essay on some important people that revered Goethe, and he sort of depicted their life and what they did. Yeah.
Are you still hanging out for a little bit while longer?
Yeah, we're actually planning to stay till 3.
Okay.
Because I kept my other.
Because I have a little bit more time that I can hang on.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, at least I have to get going. I'm sorry that your roommate that on you. And that you have to.
Technically. But
I mean,
thank you for recording that. And thank you again for that.
my pleasure.
That's great. I want to learn more.
I may not have passed them all, but he's been writing me these newsletters of some of the areas of progress. And so far he sent me 6. And there's a whole bunch of emails also. I haven't been very good at forwarding those, but if you want them, I will try and maybe redo those.
Okay.
You'll have to remind me, because I forget.
I can send you those again, just as a bunch. I mean, and the same goes, of course. I will send you the presentation and the text, so maybe you can forward this, and if anything comes up, you have my email, and I will, of course, try my best.
There was a movement a few years ago by law students to have the arm